In our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, January 16th, here on the peninsula. North Korea will make a constitutional amendment to define South Korea as the most hostile nation and shut down institutions tasked with promoting inter-Korean cooperation. Meanwhile, Seoul's finance ministry says 65% of the government's budget for the year will be put to use in the first half to better support the livelihoods of the people amid high inflation and interest rates. And former President Donald Trump claims a victory in Iowa as Republicans launch their presidential primary this week ahead of the November 5th U.S. presidential election. North Korea's Kim Jong-un is seeking to set in stone his earlier statement about South Korea being his regime's #1 enemy, while dismantling agencies assigned to advancing cross-border initiatives. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung reports.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is now pushing to make constitutional amendments to officially define South Korea as the most hostile state to the regime. The order was made on Monday during the 10th session of the 14th Supreme People's Assembly. According to state newspaper The Nodongshinmun, Kim said the regime's education and cultural sectors must strengthen the description of South Korea as being North Korea's, quote, #1 hostile country and unchangeable main enemy. Kim said it is important for the Constitution to reflect the idea of completely occupying, suppressing, and recapturing South Korea in the event of war and incorporating it into the North's territory. He also called for legal measures to declare South Korea as a completely foreign country with no intention of reconciliation and unification. Expressions such as the Northern region and peaceful unification were ordered to be deleted from the Constitution. He added that people should not use words that mislead the North and the South into being compatriots, such as referring to the peninsula as the nations of 80 million people. Also in the meeting, North Korea decided to abolish agencies in charge of inter-Korean affairs. Pyongyang's Korean Central News Agency reported that the regime will dismantle the National Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of the Fatherland and an agency in charge of the Mount Kumgang Tour project. The cabinet and relevant agencies are set to establish practical measures to implement this decision. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
And here in South Korea, President Yoon Suk-yeol says the threat to South Korea is not the North Korean people, but their regime. Speaking at a cabinet meeting earlier on this Tuesday, the president also pledged that any provocation by Pyongyang would be met with retaliation many times stronger. President further urged for unity among South Koreans and the government against North Korea's propaganda, adding that the regime's decision to define South Korea as an enemy proves its defiance of history. Meanwhile, starting this Tuesday until next Thursday, the South Korean Navy is partaking in a US-led multinational anti-submarine warfare drill known as Sea Dragon 2024 in waters of Guam. Now, 5 countries, including South Korea, the US, Japan, Australia and India, are participating in the annual joint exercise. The drill largely involves tracking and identifying submarines in response to maritime security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. South Korea's Navy has dispatched a P-3 maritime surveillance aircraft and some 40 sailors. The government is looking to front-load a bulk of its budget for this year as part of efforts to ease the cost of living for ordinary citizens. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin explains.
South Korea is set to spend heavily in the first half of the year in a bid to improve people's livelihoods. The Finance Ministry announced during an emergency economic meeting on Tuesday that the government will spend a record 65% of the central government's funds for the year during the first 6 months of 2024. This comes as South Korea continues to see weak consumption due to high inflation despite signs of economic recovery.
While the economy is showing a recovery mainly due to exports, it is expected to be difficult for people to feel this recovery in their daily lives during the first half of the year due to high inflation and interest rates.
Including local government funds, the government's plan to spend around 350 trillion won or some $260 billion in just the first half of 2024. And a significant portion of it is set to be allocated to welfare for vulnerable groups, job creation, and social overhead capital projects. The government is also moving to stabilize prices of 16 commodities in high demand to ease the burden of inflation ahead of Seollal or the New Year holiday. It aims to maintain the average prices of 16 Lunar New Year holiday commodities, such as apples and pears, below 2023 levels. It would also help provide discounts of up to 60% on agricultural, livestock, and fishery products.
We plan to supply a record 260,000 tons of high-demand products and provide discounts to manage prices at levels lower than last year's. There will be a focus on keeping the increase in prices of apples and pears in the single digits.
State-run expressway tolls will also be waived throughout the Lunar New Year holiday from February 9th to February 12th. To accommodate the increased demand for air travel over the holidays, the government also plans to increase international flights by around 10% compared to the end of last year. 이수진, Arirang News.
And now, as alluded to several times in our previous newscasts, Korea's auto exports last year did indeed post an all-time high. And this time we have the final tally from Seoul's Trade Ministry to prove it. Our An Sung-jin reports.
South Korea's automobile exports hit a record high in 2023. According to the Trade Ministry on Tuesday, the total value of exports last year reached $70.9 billion. More than a third of that figure came from eco-friendly vehicles. The total value of exports in 2023 is an increase of 30% compared to that of 2022. In terms of production, 4,240,000 cars were produced, exceeding the 4 million mark for the first time since 2018. This is largely due to a recovery in the supply of automotive semiconductors. Nearly 70% of the cars manufactured in South Korea were exported, with North America being the main market, followed by the EU. Also in 2023, the auto industry created the highest number of jobs within the country's manufacturing sector. The government aims to further bolster competitiveness in the electric vehicle sector by innovating regulations for the industry, extending tax benefits, and investing in establishing large-scale manufacturing facilities in areas including Ulsan City. Han Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And semiconductors pushed the volume of Korea's ICT exports to an annual high for the year in December. According to the Trade Ministry on this Tuesday, December's total amounted to some $18.3 billion. Now that's up over 8% on year. Chip exports, for their part, posted some $11.1 billion in December amid rising prices and higher demand. By region, exports to China, Korea's largest trading partner for the ICT sector, saw an on-year jump for the second month in a row. Staying with Seoul's Trade Ministry, officials there have also shared their latest blueprint on fostering the nation's robotics sector. Our Moon Hye-ryeon has details.
As robots and artificial intelligence are becoming increasingly integrated across all industries, the government has unveiled its blueprint for South Korea's robot industry. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy sets up a plan every 5 years to foster the development of intelligent robots in the country. And the one announced on Tuesday is their fourth, with its goal set to be achieved by 2028. The fourth Intelligent Robot Basic Plan focuses on different strategies to support new businesses which use robots, to increase their participation in industry and society, and cultivate the country's robot industry as a whole. Authorities plan to achieve this through a variety of methods, namely through funding on a scale of 3 trillion Korean won or $2.2 billion until 2030. A key area they will be looking to support is domestic production of core robot parts, aiming for 80% of parts to be produced locally by 2030. To do this, the government will be encouraging the participation of companies with high demand for robots during the development process. They will also nurture more manpower in the sector by funding robot-based education programs such as graduate schools and establishing a second center for training robot operators and coordinators. Various ministries are set to come together to achieve the goal of supplying 1 million high-tech robots by 2030 and improve 51 different regulations to promote and support distribution as soon as possible. In addition, they will increase cooperation to aid domestic robot companies entering overseas markets through active public relations and networking support, and applying for the necessary overseas certifications. To ease concerns surrounding robots, the government is planning to release a detailed guideline so that they are developed and used for the right reasons. Around $150 million will be spent on building a national robot test field to verify the stability and reliability of robots, with the aim of speeding up the process of putting robots in the development stage on the market. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Up next, we also share with you details about the Yoon administration's plans to build a semiconductor mega cluster in Gyeonggi-do province by the year 2047. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
South Korea is betting on semiconductors to provide at least 3 million quality jobs by fostering the world's largest chip cluster by 2047. That's according to a policy briefing by the Ministers of Industry and Science to President Yoon, who has been opening up a 10-part series of government reports to members of the public. With the third such session spotlighting semiconductors as the country's leading export item, the government pledged to back corporate-led efforts to foster a cutting-edge mega chip cluster in Gyeonggi-do province, home to Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. The two global chip giants will invest over $472 billion as part of national efforts to add more foundries and memory chip plants across the 21-square-meter belt. The government plans to increase tax waivers for investment in chip facilities by up to 25%, as well as create research centers with leading academic institutions and nurture 150,000 professionals in the field.
Semiconductors translate to people's livelihoods. Once completed, a total of 37 fabs will give a major boost to the economy. The industry will create 3.46 million quality jobs, $492 billion in production, and $154 billion in extra sales for affiliated firms.
Upon completion, the cluster would boast a monthly production capacity of some 7.7 million wafers, the largest in the world. According to the government, semiconductors have been South Korea's #1 export item for 11 straight years and make up around 10% of the trade-dependent country's gross domestic product. The president on Monday said building a chip ecosystem would enrich people's livelihoods and also determine the country's economic security going forward.
우리가 평소에 그걸 잘 못 느낄 수 있어요. 이게 반도체 공장이 만들어지면서 거기에 따른 이런 생태계가 조성이 되고 전후방 이런 동반 투자 효과가 생겨서 우리에게 이런 일자리가 생기는 건지 못 느끼는 경우가 많이 있습니다만은 반도체라는 거는 그만큼 우리 일반 국민들, 중산층, 서민들의 민생에 엄청난 영향을 주는 산업이라는 것을 우리가 잘 알아야 될 것 같습니다. 그러다 보니까 지금 선진국들은 이런 반도체 메가 클러스터를 구축하기 위해서 아주 치열한 전쟁을 벌이고 있습니다.
To become a first mover in cutting-edge chip technology, Yoon calls for all-out support, including sufficient electricity from nuclear energy to power the cluster. Large-scale fabrication plants in Yongin City alone are expected to require 10 gigawatts of electricity, equivalent to a quarter of the amount consumed in the Seoul capital area. The president also stressed the need for tax incentives, a wider pool of chip professionals, and collaborations with major chip producers in the global supply chain, referring to the administration's supply chain dialogue forged with the United States and Japan last year, as well as a semiconductor alliance with the Netherlands, the world's largest supplier of lithography machines. With the chip cluster up and running, the country aims to increase domestic production of key parts and equipment to 50% by 2030. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
In the U.S., the Republicans kicked off their presidential primaries today with the Iowa caucus, where former President Donald Trump took an early lead. Now, some last votes are being counted as Trump is on course to be declared the winner with around 50% of the votes. Eyes are also on the runner-up as former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis battle it out. Meanwhile, Democrats are planning to kick off their first official primary on February 3rd in South Carolina, with President Joe Biden seeking a re-election. The presidential election is set for November 5th. And this year's World Economic Forum opened doors earlier on Monday in Davos, and organizers say it comes amid the most challenging geopolitical scenario to date. Our Yoon has details.
Global elites, from business leaders to heads of state, are in Davos for the 54th World Economic Forum, which kicked off Monday morning local time under the theme of rebuilding trust. The backdrop of this year's meeting is even more complex, with issues including geopolitical tensions, evolving economic policies, and rapid technological advancements. Founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, gave opening remarks alongside the WEF president and the president of Switzerland. Addresses were also made by Chinese Premier Li Qiang and the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. With 2,800 participants from 120 countries, much of this year's focus is expected to be on high-level diplomatic talks on wars in the Middle East, Ukraine, and Africa. On Monday, Switzerland agreed to host the Global Peace Summit for Ukraine at the request of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Further details are set to be worked out starting Tuesday, but Zelensky has said that as one of Russia's key allies, China has a big role to play and called for Beijing's participation in the peace talks. Meanwhile, the Kremlin on Monday dismissed talks in Davos over Ukraine's peace proposals, saying nothing would be achieved because Russia was not part of the discussions. Representing the U.S., Secretary of State Antony Blinken, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry are in attendance. Leaders from international bodies and civil society groups also joining the forum include the United Nations' Antonio Guterres, NATO's Jens Stoltenberg, the World Health Organization's Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, and Tirana Hassan of Human Rights Watch. And prominent figures related to the global economy at the forum include the International Monetary Fund Managing Director, the World Bank President, and the World Trade Organization Director General. Ian Jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, over in the Middle East, Houthi rebels are escalating their attacks against American vessels in regional waters, keeping tensions high and Western commercial ships at bay. Our Lee Sing-jae has the latest.
Tensions continue to flare in the Red Sea as Yemen's Houthi rebels launched an anti-ship ballistic missile, which struck a U.S.-owned and operated cargo ship on Monday. The attack against the Gibraltar Eagle marks the first time the rebel group have successfully struck a U.S.-owned or operated ship. The Marshall Island-flagged bulk carrier sustained minor damage, but did not report any injuries on board. The attack comes as the Houthis announced their intention to target American ships. A Houthi spokesman added that the U.S., which recently led multinational airstrikes targeting Houthi strongholds in Yemen, was in danger of losing maritime security. He went on to say that all ships from countries participating in military attacks against them are considered enemy targets. Meanwhile, Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant said on Monday that Palestinians will govern the Gaza Strip after the war with Israel ends, adding that Hamas' rule and military threat in the enclave will also end after the war. At a press conference, Gallant stressed that as Palestinians live in the Gaza Strip, it will be the Palestinians who will live and govern it in the future. He said there would no longer be any military threat from Gaza, as the militant group won't be able to rule and function as a military force in the region. The defense chief added that the future government would be a civilian alternative, but insisted that the Israeli military would have the freedom of operation in order to protect Israeli citizens. Lee Sing-jae, Arirang News.
On a light note now, South Korea-born American actor Steven Yeun has won the Outstanding Lead Actor Award at the Emmys in Los Angeles. Now, Yeun has been dominating recent U.S. award events for his role in the Netflix series Beef. This includes wins at the Critics' Choice Awards and the Golden Globes. The Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actress in the same category went to Ali Wong. The series won a total of 8 awards Monday evening, including the Outstanding Limited or Anthology Series Award and an Outstanding Directing Award for Series Creator, Korean-American Lee Sung-jin. Team Korea kicked off its AFC Asian Cup campaign with a convincing 3-1 win over Bahrain on Monday. Now, at the Asim bin Hamad Stadium in Doha, midfielder Hwang In-bom got the Taeguk Warriors off the mark in the 38th minute before Bahrain equalized just 6 minutes into the second half. Korea's Lee Gang-in restored the team's lead with a left-foot rocket from outside the box in the 56th minute. He then showed off some quick feet in the Bahrain box in the 69th minute before curling home his second goal to wrap up the victory. South Korea will play Jordan on Saturday for its second Group E match.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. In Taipei, a delegation of former U.S. high-level officials met on Monday with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen and her successor, President-elect Lai Ching-te. 64-year-old President-elect Lai Ching-te of Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party, which is critical of Beijing, won 40% of Saturday's votes. Monday's U.S. delegation included former National Security Advisor Stephen J. Hadley and former Deputy Secretary of State James B. Steinberg. It was led by Laura Rosenberger, chair of the American Institute in Taiwan, Washington's unofficial embassy on the island. Meanwhile, amid growing tensions, the Central Pacific island nation of Nauru on Monday announced it was severing diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Earlier the same day, Nauru declared intentions to seek former ties with China. This leaves Taiwan with only 12 diplomatic allies around the world. The UN's Food and Agriculture Organization warned Sunday that millions in Sudan are facing starvation amid continued armed conflict. According to an FAO representative in Sudan, more than 25 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, with 18 million, some 40% of the population, in immediate desperate need of food security assistance. Since the outbreak of armed conflict in April 2023, production of millet in Sudan has almost halved, while maize production has decreased by a quarter. Basic grain prices rose by 200% last year. The war between rival factions in the military government of Sudan has left at least 12,000 dead and more than 7.6 million people displaced. Spain's World Cup winner and Barcelona Femeni's midfielder Aitana Bonmati has won the Best FIFA Women's Player Award for 2023. She beat her Barcelona teammate Jenny Hermoso to win at the 2023 Best FIFA Football Award ceremony at London's Hammersmith Apollo on Monday. Argentina captain and Inter Miami forward Lionel Messi won the Best FIFA Men's Player Award for the third time, beating Manchester City striker Erling Haaland and Paris Saint-Germain forward Kylian Mbappe. The Best FIFA Men's Coach Award went to Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola, while England manager Sarina Wiegman won the Best Women's Coach Award. Brunei is celebrating the royal wedding of Prince Abdul Mateen, the fourth son of world's longest reigning monarch and one of the world's richest men, Sultan Hassan al Bolkiah. The lavish 10-day-long wedding began on the 7th of January. Although Prince Mateen is only the sixth in line to the throne, he gained fame in recent years by accompanying his father on diplomatic engagements. His bride, Anisha Rojna Iza Kalebik, is the granddaughter of one of Sultan Bolkiah's key advisors. Leaders and royals from neighboring countries, including Saudi Arabia and UAE, attended the couple's Islamic wedding ceremony on Thursday. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. We had a freezing start to the day. The severe cold snap continues in most places with biting winds, and a cold wave warning in parts of Gangwon-do and Gyeonggi-do provinces dragged down the morning temperatures to below minus 15 degrees Celsius. But the cold wave subsides this afternoon. Highs will go up higher than seasonal norms today, and morning temperatures will also hike to above norms from Wednesday. Now, afternoon highs should be 1 to 5 degrees higher this afternoon across Korea, topping out at 4 degrees Celsius here in the capital. Daejeon will see a high of 5 degrees. Busan and Jeju, meanwhile, will see a high of 10 degrees Celsius. Morning sunshine will be joined by more clouds this afternoon, and air quality will be decent nationwide all day today. Instead of a chill, we'll see frequent wintry precipitation for the remainder of the week. East of Gangwon-do province will need to brace for a mix of rain and snow at the end of the week and through the weekend. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Right, and that ends Tuesday's afternoon newscast. Thank you for watching. See you in a few minutes with our daily panel session.
Join Ashley for a treat for the eyes and ears. It's time to watch the radio. You're watching Radio Cop. You're watching Arirang.
이 세상은 Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
Pundits say Asian Americans made history at this year's Golden Globes with unprecedented victories raising much expectations about their future endeavors. So what are the broader implications of this latest feat? What can be done to ensure greater diversity and inclusivity in the entertainment industry? And what are the case screen productions that look to create buzz this year?
Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today we applaud and explore the efforts of those in the screen production industry to better promote diversity and inclusivity. For this, I have Professor Jae So from the Seoul Institute of the Arts here in the studio with us. Professor So, it's been a while since we've had you here.
Nice
Welcome.
to be back.
Right. I also have our film critic Jason Bechevet with us. Jason, it's lovely to have you back.
Yes, great to be here as always. Happy New Year.
Right, Happy New Year to you too. Professor, so Asian Americans, they've been making history at a number of US screen production awards, with the more recent one being the Emmy Awards in Los Angeles on Monday evening, where Steven Yeun won Outstanding Lead Actor Award, I believe, for his role in Beef. What are your thoughts regarding these latest achievements by Asian Americans?
Well, that's the hottest news right now. It just happened. So Beef was actually nominated for 13 categories in the Emmys, and it won 5. So Steven Yeun of Korean descent basically won the Best Actor for that category. It's for limited, I think, Best Limited Series or Anthology. And also Ali Wong, and then the director Lee Sung-jin won for that as well. And also, you know, the Golden Globes also just happened, and they also won, out of 5 nominations, they won 3. So Best Anthology Series there as well, you know, and basically Best Director for Lee Sung-jin, and also Best Actor for Steven Yeun. And I think what's of note is that it's the first time somebody of Korean descent won that category, so it's a big deal. And of course, we started out with Parasite years ago, and then, you know, moved on with Minari, and it's just been a constant thing with a lot of Asian Americans and Asians kind of sweeping the awards. And Celine Song also had a Past Lives, another feature film that actually got nominated for a lot of categories, but didn't win anything. So I think, you know, a lot of Asian content now, and filmmakers of Asian descent are now just kind of taking a primary spot in the spotlight for a lot of cinema, also, you know, limited series or dramas.
Right, indeed. And before we delve any further into that, Jason, what is it about the Netflix comedy drama series Beef that is resonating perhaps with audiences?
Well, simply put, it's just very, very good. Yeah, it's just really well written and directed. The storytelling is superb. I mean, it essentially begins with this kind of road rage incident that sparks off this rather strange chain of events. And I think in some ways it feels very American. I mean, I guess in some respects it's about the American dream, and it's told from the perspective of Asian Americans. And so there is a big focus on the individual, but I think what I liked about this is how you see these individuals kind of connect in really kind of surprising ways. I love the way it finishes as well, because you basically have these 2 characters that begin the show, they kind of conclude the first season in a really kind of emotional fashion. And, you know, it's superbly acted, the production values are fantastic. And yeah, the production design is really well shot, and it's really amusing. It's fun, you know. There is definitely a critique there of American society and Asian Americans in American society, but at the same time, it never takes itself too seriously. It kind of has this, I guess, almost Coen brothers kind of sensibility to it, and yeah, it's a superb show, and I think each episode is around about 30-35 minutes, so it's told at a really brisk pace, and yeah, it's lots to like. It's a very, yeah, it's superbly.
Right, pace is a very important factor in over OTT, of course. And I understand that the plot itself is based on director Lee Sung-jin's personal experience.
Yeah, I mean that makes it all the more kind of interesting, and I think it's something you can relate to. I mean, those who find themselves in these incidents where they kind of can't control themselves, and retribution and but also the kind of the interactions you have with one another, and kind of the connections you don't think you share initially, but actually over time you realize that you do. There is a connection there, and we're all human beings. We're all living in the same neighborhood, same world, same city, or wherever it may be. And there's this kind of critique of, I guess, yeah, the American dream, like I mentioned, and trying to get on the social ladder. And that's the kind of content that's proving really popular. We've seen that in Korea, of course, with Parasite and Squid Game. And this feels very American, but also it's somewhat different, and I think that's one of the reasons why people have really kind of connected with it.
Right, indeed.
Wherever they are,
right.
In the world.
For sure. Shamefully, I've yet to see it, though, which is why I'm going to ask you this in the next question, hoping you're not going to give too much away. Based on the ending that you saw for the first part, do you expect we're looking at a sequel?
I hope
season
so.
2.
There's definitely, I think there's definitely potential for a second season. Netflix would be crazy not to. But then, I mean, the first season was so good. So I guess the issue there is like, well, if we have a second season, there needs to be enough in the screenplay for it to kind of carry on, continue for another 10 episodes. And only the screenwriter Lee Sung-jin knows that. It's a tough act to follow, to be honest. Because the season 1 is, I mean, it's possibly one of the best Netflix series I've seen on it.
That's exactly what I'm going to be watching this weekend,
yeah,
this coming
really
weekend for sure. Professor, so a US study on top 10 grossing films from 2010 up to the year 2019, right before the pandemic, shows that most Asians on screen are usually the center of jokes. Now, given these latest advances made by Asian Americans on US screens, do you suppose there's going to be a tangible shift in this trend?
I think for sure, but at the same time, there's a real long tradition starting way before 2010. If you could go back to the beginning of cinema, you have figures like Fu Manchu, Dragon Lady. These are kind of Asian stereotypes that started in cinema as kind of like the evil ones and things like that. And of course, America is, with Hollywood there, they have a history that's very, it has to do with everything from slavery to a lot of like racial stuff that's happened. There's the Exclusionary Act of 1924 where they, basically were against Chinese people trying to, basically become naturalized American citizens like anybody else. And also during World War II, they had Japanese internment camps. So basically, the image that most Americans had of Asians were basically an outsider. The male figure was usually either, a martial artist or an evil character or a nerd. And the women were exotic creatures. That's the way the stereotype worked. And I think the advent of basically a lot of things changed with perhaps maybe not just movies, but, like K-pop is a big influence. I think anime is another big influence. And then dramas and movies really started to change the image for that. And so now the stereotypical image of that nerdy Asian guy that only does math or something is changing to, now you have sports figures like Shohei Ohtani, who's like a big figure in like the pastime of America, the favorite one, which is, baseball. So we have this shift, and I think, as you mentioned, that trends are happening, but now, Hollywood is more kind of, I would say, politically to the left than they are conservative. So they're very kind of sensitive to these issues. And I think last year, Everything Everywhere All at Once, that kind of movie where, it was mostly an Asian cast. You had Michelle Yeoh sort of headlining that. It's really starting to change from her being an action star to a dramatic star. And, you know, the image of Asians sort of being the butt of the joke, as you mentioned, you know, that's still going to happen. But I think with more of the zeitgeist of people kind of realizing that, you know, there's more to Asians than just those kinds of limited stereotypes. And of course, we live in Asia, so we don't really see that, you know, difficulty because, you know, our representation is 100%. But I've lived in the U.S. for a long time, and I know a lot of Asian Americans that they kind of felt slighted by those kinds of things, where as a minority, they're also, Asians are considered the model minority, you know, the ones that are really nice, that study well. And so a lot of my friends were kind of frustrated with that image, and so they really love all this like stuff like Squid Game coming out. Beef, another one, is just kind of telling you the story behind the scenes of, you know, what I loved about Beef, for example, is they really kind of touch on Korean religion in America too, about Christian, you know, like the Christian values that I think there's Christianity and then there's Korean Christianity, which is really hardcore. So they touch upon that. They touch upon sort of the 1.5 generation to 2.0 generation of Korean Americans that are kind of trying to connect with like Koreans. And so there are all these issues that come up, and what I loved about it is the complexity of these kind of things that are happening. So I think we're in a state of flux right now, and it's a good thing.
Right, for sure, for sure. Jason, what are your thoughts regarding concerns over misrepresentation and underrepresentation of Asians on screen productions?
Well, I think we've actually come a long way. I'm rewatching the Bond films with my son, and some of them are just frankly really racist. So, you know, like films like Goldfinger, and I'm having
Odd Job.
Yeah, and so I'm having to, you know, it's good to watch them with him and explain to him, you know, the problematic characters and some of the representations of some of these kind of, especially the more villainous roles in these films. And then watching films today, I think there has been a lot of progress. Of course, there's still, the American studios can do a lot more to focus on diversity and capturing, you know, because America is a very culturally diverse place, as is the UK, where I'm from. And that's also an issue that is being addressed, but there's certainly, in terms of ensuring that there is fair representation, there's still some way to come. I think in the States, I would mention kind of studios like A24, which is behind Beef and some of these films as well, focusing on Asian Americans. So it's great to see these kind of younger studios coming through, and they're proving to be incredibly successful at securing Oscar nominations. And so I think the way the studio system's kind of evolved as well, with this kind of Neon as well, which distributed Parasite, and I think they've done a lot to try and kind of promote these films that focus on, you know, either, you know, in the case of Parasite, Koreans, but also in films like Minari, Korean Americans and Asian Americans. So yeah, I think lots of progress, especially when you kind of go back and watch older films. But yeah, still some way to come.
Right. Professor So, let's now turn our attention to some of the Korean productions that we can expect to see this year, 2024. Which ones are, or should we be looking forward to?
Well, the big one is Bong Joon-ho's next film, which is called Mickey 17. It's based on a sci-fi novel, Mickey 7, and it's starring Steven Yeun in it as well, and then Robert Pattinson, who played Batman. So, you know, it's a stellar cast. It's a famous novel, and you know, sci-fi is, I think, you know, Snowpiercer was Bong Joon-ho's last foray into sci-fi, but I think, you know, he's now tackling the genre that he's already touched upon. So the big kind of expectation around the world for that, and also Park Chan-wook's film. He's doing a series on HBO called The Sympathizer, and that's based on a Pulitzer-winning novel by a Vietnamese-American writer. And that one basically has Robert Downey Jr. as one of the cast members, and it's about like the area of the Vietnam War, and there's a sort of a double agent, that Vietnamese-American double agent in the story. So he's tackling, again, like a all-English, you know, script, and he's the showrunner for it, and he's also directing that as well. So, and then he's also producing and writing a film called War and Revolt for Netflix as well, which is coming out. That's a Korean language film. It's directed by a different director, but Park Chan-wook is actually producing that, and also he wrote the screenplay for it. And then we have, of course, the first one didn't do that well. Alienoid 2 just came out, which by Choi Dong-woon, who's actually a director I really admire because his movies have done really well. He's like one of the, I would say, the most successful directors we have in Korea. Although in the West, he's not as well recognized. But Alienoid 2 was made at the same time as 1. Unfortunately, 1 last year really did badly in the box office. Jason really liked that movie.
I did?
Yeah, it's like a genre that mixes sci-fi with ancient, medieval times and things like that. So he is doing that one. So that's another one that's playing right now. And then we have Roundup 4, I believe, by Ma Dong-seok, which 3 did really well. But we talked about this in the other show, on your show, I think. Basically, we talked about how the third one, the story wasn't that great, but I heard the fourth one is actually better.
I hope so.
Yeah,
we'll keep our fingers crossed.
I hope so.
And then Yoo Seung-wan has a movie. He was very famous for a movie called Veteran, so he's making a sequel to that. So it seems like all the familiar directors are trying new things or sort of doing the sequel thing, which is safer. Because right now the industry is, as you know, last year it didn't do that well.
Right, and speaking about sequels, are you looking forward to Alienoid 2 as Professor?
Well, actually, I saw Alienoid Part 2, and I liked it a lot. I think Choi Dong-woon is very he's very good at kind of making these projects big in scale. He understands his audience quite well, and this was certainly a very ambitious project, kind of bringing together sci-fi. It feels a bit like Terminator 2, also the kind of the period elements of the story, yeah, I mean, it does feel, kind of like Marvel as well, but sci-fi is a very hard genre to kind of localize because that's a genre that's entrenched in kind of popular kind of American culture, and directors have been very successful in kind of experimenting with genres and localizing them and making them very popular and accessible for local audiences here in Korea. The thriller, the action film, and so on and so forth, even the horror genre as well. But with sci-fi, it's definitely a lot harder to do, and directors have really struggled with it. And Netflix have actually been far better. Well, the Netflix kind of series and the kind of more dystopian fare that's done quite well on Netflix. That's kind of, I think, been quite, directors have been a bit more successful on the platform in using science fiction as a way to try and kind of tap into this kind of growing market for overseas. But locally, science fiction is a very challenging prospect. And Choi Dong-woon took on that challenge. And I like it. I like it very much. I like the second part especially, but I'm not of the majority.
Right, I see. And speaking about challenges, Professor, so the local film industry here in the country, it's been reported to be facing quite a number of challenges. What challenges do you suppose, Professor, so need to be addressed immediately?
Well, last year, 23 was a bad year. We did, I think, pre-pandemic levels. It was like something like 48% of box office, income. So, really, big movies like Road to Boston, The Moon, even a more successful movie like Concrete Utopia, which I really liked,
it's good,
didn't do as well as, normally pre-pandemic that would have been like over 10 million people at the box office, but it didn't really do that well. So. The usual story is about, basically COVID, the pandemic really kind of destroyed the audience participation in cinemas. Also, they raised the prices, and of course, OTTs, things like that. But I think goes kind of more than that is the fact that right now, a lot of the producers that make the movies are looking at what Netflix is doing, looking at what Hollywood is doing, and making these kind of big, budgeted movies that it doesn't really have an author per se behind the story. So it's more kind of like machine produced or run through an AI or something like that. That's the way kind of I think about it. So the problem is that, the directors that are successful, like Park Chan-wook or Bong Joon-ho, they're auteurs. They're very special. They write their own scripts. They're not get handed something. And a lot of these movies that are sort of tanking are, you know, the director's just like a director for hire. It's really producer-driven. And so I think, more than anything, I think we have to kind of come up with a solution to study, like, basically there's a disconnect between what these producers want to make and what audiences want to see. And, you know, actually Jason wrote an article, or was interviewed in an article where he talked about 12/12 the day, which is really wonderful right now. It's done pre-pandemic. In fact, it kind of overwhelmed that, right? It's over like 12 million people in the box office, so it's a huge hit. So you have to ask yourself, why a historical drama about a dictator? Why is that so popular? Again, you have to see that movie, I think most of the producers probably missed that, but it's directed by Kim Sung-soo's another auteur. You know, basically, he just told a really good story with a, you know, I watched it, and it's gripping. You know, it's you watch it, and it's like, you know, and it's a story that we all know already. You know, so it's a political drama, but it's personalized. You know, it's from the director's point of view of like how he would present this. Of course, good acting and all that. So we have all the elements. I think what we have to do, the challenge is try to come up with movies. Go back to like the drawing board and see why Parasite, Old Boy, you know, movies like that did well. And we have to kind of do that instead of spending a lot of money and benchmarking movies outside of Korea. Because I think what audiences love about Squid Game, or what they love about Beef, is its originality, you know. And you can't just, producers kind of look at what worked in the past and try to duplicate that. And it's never worked for even Hollywood, you know. So I think Korea is in this kind of crossroads right now. We have to figure out how to get people back into the cinemas. But right now, you know, it's looking kind of bleak, but hopefully we'll have more movies that people want to go see on the big screen.
Right, hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. And on that note, we'll end today's discussion. Professor So, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Jason, it's been absolutely lovely having you here today.
Absolute pleasure as always.
Right. Well, that brings us to the end of Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. Be sure to join us same time tomorrow.